The next item of business is consideration of Business Motion 19807 in the name of Graham Day on behalf of the Parliamentary Bureau on changes to business. Any member who wishes to speak to the motion should press their request to speak button now. And I call on the Minister to move the motion.
Move, Presiding Officer.
Thank you. No member has asked to speak to the motion. Therefore, the question is that motion 19807 be agreed. Are we all agreed? Yes. The motion is therefore agreed. The next item of business is consideration of Parliamentary Bureau Motion 19808 on committee meeting times. Any member who wishes to speak to the motion should press their request to speak button now. And I call on the Minister to move the motion.
Move, Presiding Officer.
Thank you. No member has asked to speak to the motion. Therefore, the question is that motion 19808 be agreed. Are we all agreed? Yes. The motion is therefore agreed. The next item of business is topical questions. At question number 1, I call Bob Doris.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. To ask the Scottish Government, in light of cold temperatures and the first snowfall, whether it will provide an update regarding the steps it is taking to provide any households at risk of fuel poverty.
Cabinet Secretary Mary McCallum.
Presiding Officer, in an energy-rich nation like Scotland, nobody should be struggling to pay their bills, but that continues to be the reality for far too many as successive UK governments fail to get a grip on spiralling energy costs. Indeed, this Labour government came to power promising to reduce average bills by £300, but in just over a year they've raised by nearly 200 more. We've repeatedly called on the UK government to introduce a social tariff to address unaffordable bills at source. Our targeted discount proposals would see estimated fuel bills reduced by an average of £700 and lift around 135,000 households out of fuel poverty. Meantime, the Scottish Government continues to use the power available to us to raise incomes and to improve energy efficiency, including increased funding for Warmer Home Scotland, investing around £196 million in our suite of winter heating payments this year, and providing a further £1 million to support advice services to help people struggling with energy debt, and that's part of a package of nearly £17 million.
Bob Doris.
I thank the Cabinet Secretary for the update. I want to concentrate on pensioners. The Scottish Government's pension age winter heating will provide vital support to older people in Scotland this summer. The context is that Labour slashed the winter heating support for pensioners last year, which led to the SNP stepping in to ensure pensioners in Scotland would not lose out this winter. Whilst I note Labour's eventual U-turn on the matter, can I get assurances from the Cabinet Secretary matters in Scotland are on track as winter is now approaching? Can the Minister provide, the Cabinet Secretary provide any update on the rollout of the Scottish Government's winter heating payment, and how many older people is anticipated that this payment will support to heat their homes this winter?
Cabinet Secretary.
Presiding Officer, payments have now commenced and will be made in batches over the coming weeks, with the first pension age winter heating payments reaching bank accounts last week. Through this, we are delivering real support to pensioners across Scotland to the tune of about £157 million, and this is helping approximately 880,000 pensioners to stay warm in the coldest months. And it's worth noting that, unlike in the rest of the UK, eligible low-income households, including pensioners across Scotland, are also guaranteed support through our winter heating payment, and we expect those payments to begin in early December.
Bob Doris.
I thank the Cabinet Secretary that matters are on track in relation to those pensioner payments. This support will be more necessary than ever given this winter as energy bills spiral by an average of £200, despite Labour promise to cut bills by £300. It is scandalous, Presiding Officer, that pensioners in Scotland pay some of the highest bills in Europe despite having a huge wealth of natural energy resource on their doorsteps. The Cabinet Secretary mentioned the possibility of a social tariff on energy bills. This is absolutely the strategic approach we need in tackling pensioner poverty and fuel poverty more generally. So can the Cabinet outline the steps taken already by the Scottish Government to develop a social tariff which could benefit pensioners suffering from fuel poverty, and see how this could be delivered within a UK context, or indeed with the Fresh Start independence would offer us?
Cabinet Secretary.
Presiding Officer, we have consistently and repeatedly called on the UK Government to deliver a social tariff. I am very proud of the work that the Scottish Government has done to develop proposals of a social tariff. We've done this in concert with experts, and of course it takes the form of an automatic and targeted discount on energy bills to address the chronic issues of unaffordability of bills right at the source. And I think, as Mr Doris points out, the UK Government's continued failure to address this issue, to recognise the harm that bills and indeed the associated debt are causing to households, is just another indication of the fact that we ought to have control over our own energy resources for the benefit of people of Scotland.
Thank you. Move to question 2. I call Craig Hoy.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. To ask the Scottish Government what its response is to reports that its core operating costs have increased by £53 million between 2023-24 and 2024-25.
Minister Ivan McKee.
The Scottish Government recognises the importance of ensuring funds are aligned to support frontline services. That is the core of our public service reform programme, which will shift an annualised £1 billion to the front line over the next 5 years. The changes to Scottish Government operating costs in 24-25 was driven by a change in practice, primarily reducing the use of expensive contingent workers and taking these roles in-house where appropriate. The financial practice for recording the costs of many of these contingent workers ordinarily lies out with the core operating costs. And when the roles are moved in-house, this is reflected in what is presented in the accounts. In that year, the number of contingent workers was reduced by over 200, and the combined reduction across directly employed staff and contractors was over 160. These reductions in headcount will accelerate as new recruitment controls take effect, and budget controls on Scottish Government operating costs will deliver real-term reductions in costs going forward.
Craig Hoy.
Despite that bluster, it is crystal clear that a £53 million surge in the SNP Government's operating costs in a single year, which comes at a time when frontline services are struggling and people are paying more in tax, is not a sign that this Government is on control of costs within its government machine. And from an FOI that we received over the course of the summer, this rise exceeds the Government's own forecasts and confirms that the cost of government has almost doubled since 2018. Is this not concrete evidence that this is a Government that has completely lost its control of its grip on spending? And how can anyone believe that this SNP Government can run Scotland's finances and reform Scotland's public services when the Minister for Public Finance, who is meant to be bringing down the cost of government, can't even control the costs of the core government machine?
Minister.
Well, as I already indicated, the number of heads in the Scottish Government is continuing to reduce in total. Much of that is because we are taking out significant numbers of expensive contractors, which I'm sure the member would welcome, and replacing those with in-house staff. The number of in-house staff is also reducing. Clear targets have been set for each of the next 5 years in terms of headcounts and in terms of budgets. We will see real-term reduction in Scottish Government operating costs over each of the next 5 years, and we will see a reduction in headcount of around 4% across the total Scottish Government over each of those years. That work is happening. We have control of that recruitment process, we have control of that budgeting process, and that is what is driving these savings that will allow us to redirect that £1 billion to the front line.
Craig Hoy.
Only in the SNP's la-la world can the headcount fall but the salary bill soar. Isn't the truth of the matter now even worse? Because internal documents released by Mr McKee's own officials confirm that there is no, quotes, fully costed plan to deliver £1 billion in saving, which, let's not forget, Minister, includes a 20% reduction in staffing costs. And can the Minister also confirm whether or not that means a 20% reduction in staff numbers over the next 4 years? But one other memo also confirms that Mr McKee does not, quotes, expect to be able to provide a fully costed plan, and another memo insists that ministers do not have a specific plan for each round of savings. So can Mr McKee tell Parliament today, 6 months on from that bold £1 billion announcement, does he actually have a plan, or is he just playing for time to get this failing government and its fragile finances through the next election?
Minister.
Yeah, there absolutely is a plan. We published the corporate costs, which total £5 billion last year. The 20% is the 20% of that is obviously, the member can do the maths, is the £1 billion. So it's very clear across which public bodies that falls, across which portfolios it falls, how much of that is headcount, how much of it is states, how much of it is procurement. That is very clearly articulated as 20% of that £5 billion. And I say we've published all of that data, and if the member cares to go and look at it, he'll find it online. The targets have been set for portfolios for next year and each of the years after that are very clear in their headcount targets, and they're very, which is dependent on the ratio of front line to back office staff within each of those portfolios, and it's very clear on our corporate cost reductions, and that is rolled out across all of the public bodies as well. So the data is there. The whole of the government and the public sector is working to that data. That's what's going to deliver those headcount reductions of 4% per year going forward. That will be, as the member indicates, a reduction in total headcount of 20% by the end of that 5-year period, and that is within the attrition rate that government currently applies to government.
We move to question number 3. I call Martin Whitfield.
I'm very grateful, Presiding Officer, to ask the Scottish Government what its response is to reports that the University of Edinburgh plans to reduce jobs by up to 1,800 as part of a £140 million in budget reductions by 26-27, including what action it will take to protect staff and students from the impact of any such redundancies.
Minister Ben Macpherson.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. The university sector across the UK continues to face financial challenges due to a number of factors, including the impact of increases to national insurance contributions and migration policies. While the University of Edinburgh is an autonomous institution, the Scottish Government expects staff and trade unions to be consulted meaningfully and constructively on the potential impact of any cost-saving measures in line with Fair Work principles. Ministers cannot compel universities to commit to no compulsory redundancies. However, our clear expectation is that they are only considered as a last resort after all other cost-saving measures have been fully explored.
Martin Whitfield.
Very grateful for that response, but students at Edinburgh University are already seeing the impact of these cuts. Courses reduced, support services scaled back, and staff who do not know if they will even be employed next year. Scotland prides itself on world-class higher education, but that is not what the students are experiencing. Staff are overwhelmingly supporting the ongoing action in a reballot, and as Joe Grady, UCU General Secretary, said, before this dispute escalates further, university senior managers need to reflect on where their actions are taking the university and engage urgently and seriously with the union. So does the Minister agree, at the very least, the Government's convening power should be used to bring the parties together and ensure that students are not the ones who pay the price for decisions driven by underfunding and financial instability? Minister.
I thank Martin Whitfield for bringing this issue to the Chamber, and would like to start off by emphasising, as he has stated within his answer, that my thoughts and that of the Government are with those who are affected, students and, of course, staff, including constituents who have been in touch with me in recent days. As the member helpfully, constructively suggested, and as Parliament would expect, ministers will consider what ways we can meaningfully try to assist in this situation, including potentially using our convening power. However, mindful of the fact that the University of Edinburgh is an autonomous institution. I had a good meeting with UCU on a number of matters recently, and would be happy to receive further correspondence from them on this matter.
Martin Whitfield.
I'm grateful, Presiding Officer. Answers maybe next year, questions this year. The crisis isn't confined to Edinburgh. We now have up to 1,800 jobs at risk there, 600 redundancies proposed at Dundee, 70 at Napier, and 14 million deficit at UWS. The Scottish Funding Council reports 9 universities already in deficit, rising to 11 next year. University Scotland has said the latest funding allocation does not give the sector what it needs. So does the Scottish Government accept that these real terms cuts to university funding, increasing reliance on volatile international income, have helped create the conditions for mass redundancies and pain across this sector? And what is the plan to prevent institutions from sliding further in crisis?
Minister.
As I stated in response in my first answer, the university sector across the UK is facing multiple challenges. And in Scotland, many of these are external. For example, the estimated cost to Scottish universities of over £48 million of the increase in national insurance contributions that the UK Government implemented this financial year in its last budget. Of course, we are all waiting to see what the Chancellor does in her budget on Wednesday the 26th of November, next Wednesday. And I think the real question for all of us, and the question the university sector will be asking at this moment, is what is the UK Government going to do to support these very important economic institutions as well as centres of educational excellence. In terms of what the Scottish Government is doing in the face of this challenge and in consideration of our budgets, not just in the financial year ahead but thereafter, we continue to engage with the university sector to ensure long-term sustainability of funding and success for Scottish universities, from the very clear start point that this government will not reintroduce tuition fees. We are currently scoping and shaping a framework for the future sustainability of the sector and have been engaging with key stakeholders, including sector leaders, staff and student representatives and cross-party MSPs, to discuss how they can be involved and to make sure they have the appropriate input into these ideas. And I will update Parliament in due course on this.
Thank you. Paul McLennan.
Thank you, Presiding Officer, and I think the Minister might have just answered my question there, but I've been obviously contacted by constituents also, where they have mentioned the issue of tuition fees, and both obviously Labour and Conservatives have implemented these in the future and might talk about this going forward to address the pressures. Can I just ask the Minister again, what was his point of view on tuition fees that are being used going forward?
Minister.
I thank the member for that question, and of course, there has been some discussion regarding tuition fees in this wider challenge that we all face with regard to the sustainability financially of our excellent universities. And if tuition fees were a solution in this scenario, then why are institutions in England and Wales facing financial challenges as well? Clearly, tuition fees from undergraduate students would not be a solution to the sustainability challenges. What would be helpful is to see appropriate investment in these, not just educational institutions, but of course massive economic drivers in our economy by the UK Government in its budget through revenue and capital to help create the economic growth that we all want to see.
And Alex Cole-Hamilton.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. The Minister will recall that I invited Sir Peter Matheson here to meet a group of Edinburgh MSPs in the early summer. He suggested that Edinburgh would be out of breach of covenant within 3 years, irrespective of voluntary or mandatory redundancies. What meetings has he had with the principal? And secondly, can I ask, given the volatility that Martin Whitfield says describes in terms of the international student cohort we depend on, does he recognise that his predecessor Graham Day told this Parliament that the funding system for higher education is fundamentally broken, and what plans does he have to fix it?
Minister.
In terms of the latter point, I've talked in a previous answer about the work that is going on to scope and shape the framework for the future sustainability of the sector work that the Scottish Government is taking forward with Universities Scotland, and I would be pleased to have engagement from the Liberal Democrats in this process, because as I said, we are seeking to have representatives from cross-party MSPs, and I will update Parliament on this work in due course as soon as possible. This work is going to be so important to make sure that collectively we embrace the challenge of making sure that we have a university sector and wider tertiary system that is well positioned to shape and respond over the next 20 years, including in terms of demographics, the needs of students and the needs of the changes in the economy that we will see through the next quarter of this century. In terms of engagement with university principals, whether it was events that I was at last week, or visiting specific campuses, or engaging with Universities Scotland, through the nearly 2 months that I've been in this post, I have sought to engage with university principals as much as possible. In terms of the principal of the University of Edinburgh, of course, in my capacity as a constituency MSP, I have had engagement with him for many years, and as is appropriate, I will engage with him going forward.